All right, welcome to another episode of The Rational Educator. We're going to start today by talking about a recent decision by Florida's Department of Education. On April 18th of 2022, Florida's Department of Ed announced a list of 54 math textbooks rejected for consideration in K through 12 public schools. Now, predictably, this set off a firestorm of controversy, with the political left characterizing it as the equivalent of book burning, with commentators calling it the banning of math by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. The truth is much more complicated, and here to trace the history of this story is our own Doctor of Education, Deanna Heikkinen.
Well, it's quite interesting. Florida keeps on making news this year with their education. I mean, they signed House Bill 1557 in, which is the parental rights in education. Basically, that just stated that you shouldn't be teaching primary kids about gender orientation and sexual identity. I wouldn't want my kindergartner to be taught that by someone other than myself. I probably wouldn't even teach my own kindergartner about that. So, but now we have this textbook issue that has come up. And so what happened and what's been going on is something that goes on in pretty much every state. The Department of Education puts out a call or a bid to textbook producers to go just submit their books. And so what the process is that they will submit in usually electronic format in the modern day books. And then there are reviewers that are chosen for each subject. And these would be educators and people that are familiar with the subject and the content, and they review the books. And so what happened is that there were 132 books that were submitted for K through 12. And of those 132, 54 were rejected for having things that went against the Florida state standards. Now, this is quite common. And the idea of having these regional standards in textbooks is nothing new, because particularly when you look at social studies or history, each state has a year, usually around fourth grade, where they have their own local history that's taught. So they're going to have their own books. Some states have even gone in and edited what they want in American history books for both primary grades, middle school, and in high school, sometimes taking out things or kind of changing the way it's taught, or what I would call the slant of how things are taught. And some examples of this is in California. I know some of the social studies books have taken out some things about the Revolutionary era and the colonial era in lieu of having more modern things to celebrate the contributions of particular individuals based on either their race or gender, sexuality. And so they're taking out history of the United States and replacing it with these, what we would call micro histories as historians. Also, in other parts of the country, particularly in the South and some parts of the Midwest, on biology textbooks, there may be a sticker on the outside that says evolution is just a theory, kind of a disclaimer. And so this regionalization is very, very common. But because of the political divide and what's going on right now, particularly with critical race theory, with teaching of all of these different genders and sexualities, and really taking away objectivity, even in language, where the idea of a pronoun, which is basically a replacement of a noun, and it is English doesn't have gendered nouns like other languages. French, Spanish, male, female, neuter are the genders. And so a computer is female in French. We don't have that, but we do have pronouns where she would take the place of a female or girl. And that's always been traditional. That's the standard of the English language grammatically. And that has been completely obliterated. And so this idea of social justice math is not new. I am sad to report. This is something that has been going on for over a decade.
What you're saying is that these textbooks were rejected because of their particular political content that was intended to indoctrinate the students in a particular ideology.
Absolutely. So what's been happening, there's a trend in mathematics, like in a lot of other disciplines, I mentioned history, where you're
mathematical or education of mathematics.
Education of mathematics and math education, particularly through K through 12, but it is kind of going up into the colleges, but it originated in K through 12, and it's something called social justice math. And it actually began with, there's a website that started in 2007 and by an educator named Jonathan Osler, and it's called Radical Math. And this is one of the biggest, sort of like the oldest things that I know of in terms of social justice math. And the idea is to make math relevant to students. And by doing so, you want to educate the students. And a lot of the social justice math starts around 6th grade and goes all the way through high school. There are ways that it's been implemented in lower grades, but that's really the sweet spot is middle school. And what they do is that they create what we call this project-based learning opportunities, where students will be given a problem such as incarceration rates. And then they will be asked to talk about how it seems that the incarceration rates are racially biased by doing these mathematical problems. And those are the sort of things that are being given. They may be given some probability homework. There's even algebraic expressions that can be solved by looking at charts and graphs and percentages. And so what they're using as a base, so instead of that idea of you have two trains, one that leave the station, one goes in one direction, one goes in the opposite direction for 45 minutes, one's traveling at this rate and the other one's traveling at that rate, how far apart do they end up? Those problems are being replaced with these very I guess we could say politicized elements. And the reason, or sort of the reasoning behind this and how I feel they're getting away with it is like, oh, well, there's the math scores are really low, and there's this issue with people having math anxiety or math panic. And so this makes math relatable. We're trying to relate to the students. And that's how they're sneaking in these political ideas to show that we live in a systemically racist society, and that racist has this white face, which is actually something that has been quoted and taught. And even math teachers are assigning these written reports to find a non-white math person from history and present it to the class, and showing that math has historically been a white thing, and we need to take it back. We need to empower it to not be something that is white. So that's what's been going on in a nutshell.
Andy Bernstein, what's wrong with trying to make math relatable?
Well, nothing's wrong with trying to make math relatable. I wish they had made it more relatable to me when I was in school. I struggled with algebra. But since when do we equate racist with relatable? I mean, that is what a terrible conflation that is. So I mean, look. If you want, I think if we want to make math relatable, and I've commented on this in my book, why Johnny still can't read. I think I struggled with algebra because I think it was taught in an overly abstract way, and I didn't realize that until in grad school, in studying philosophy, reading Aristotle's Physics. And Aristotle pointed out that math studies the quantifiable aspects of entities, or math studies the quantifiable aspects of objects. And something hit me that, not that I was that concerned with teaching math, but that to make math relatable, we need, I think, as somebody who was a weak math student, need to bring it to the observational level and do a lot of what Dr. D was talking about. Trains leaving the station, we're cutting up apples or muffins. We're studying the quantifiable aspects of things at sea level. It's perceptual, that it's not overly abstract. And I think this is the way that you make math relatable. You bring it to the observational level where we can actually see, touch, and hear things. And I think that makes it much less anxiety provoking for kids of any ages. But racism has no place in math or in any other subject. You're preaching to the kids that that white people are racist, so that if most great mathematicians historically were white, then therefore math is racist. I mean, this is just vicious. This vicious nonsense. And the incarceration rates. Let's we're going to get real here. Over the last 50 years, the rate of violent crime and homicide rate in a number of Black urban neighborhoods has just gone off the charts. Year after year after year, the Department of Justice statistics show thousands of young Black men murdered, thousands every year, 90% of them by Black criminals. So if you want to save Black lives, which, saving any human lives is a good thing, Black lives or any other, then these criminals need to be incarcerated. You can make a case that in order to save Black lives, the incarceration rates for Blacks are too low, that there's too many thugs on the street, gangbangers, little gun busters, as they're known in the projects, murdering, Black Americans, some of them other drug dealers, but some, a lot of times it's innocent people who get caught in the crossfire. So, I mean, to say that the incarceration rates in the United States are skewed, towards this higher percentage of Black inmates than other races, whites or others, is true, but it's a half truth. You look at the crime rate and you see, why that's the case. So, they're lying. It's racist. It's pure Marxist propaganda filtered through postmodernism, to show that the wealthy oppress the poor, the whites oppress the Blacks, the men oppress the women, the straights oppress the gays. And it's all to put us in conflict, class war, racial conflict, gender conflict, sexual orientation conflict. That's what it's designed to do. To bring about seething hatreds and class conflicts and these other types of conflicts in the United States and tear the country apart. Basically, the goal is to destroy capitalism ultimately and establish a communist state. So they're lying, they're telling half truths, and they're pushing pure unadulterated racism. It's disgusting, and that's what we need to fight it. In every way we possibly can. The best way to fight it, of course, is for parents to realize this, pull their kids out of the school, get them away from the propaganda, and teach them actually academic subjects at home. Whether, homeschooling, homeschool co-ops, tutors, just finding disgruntled teachers to form micro schools or small community schools. There's a number of options today. But, we've discussed that before. I'm sure we'll discuss it again.
I know that one of the reasons why this story has had such staying power, how it's seem to have really made an impact in the culture wars, is because we're not used to thinking of math as a political battleground. We think of math as pure, untouched kind of environment where political matters don't apply. And it's shocking to see that it has become a political battleground filled with indoctrination. But we know this to occur in other subjects taught in schools. When we look at literature and history, we know that they've been politicized for decades, if not longer. But math is a new battleground. And I think we can look back to some of the thinkers and figures in education history that have brought us to this moment in time. We know that thinkers like Paulo Freire have taught that the classroom is a stage to foment revolution. And any excuse, any opening is, in fact, the purpose of education is to prepare children for revolution. And
he means communist revolution, not revolution in support of a free society.
So we know that this goes back further than even 2007, when we first started to hear about math being a battleground for political indoctrination. So let's talk about that a little bit.
The word pedagogy is really, if you look up the definition of it, it basically is the method and practice of teaching an academic subject or theoretical concept. And it's generally understood that pedagogy, with the beginning of the word being ped, which is the root word, is for children. Andragogy would be to teach adults, if you want to get into, the language issues here. But pedagogy is basically the method and practice of teaching. That is the definition that we have known for a very long time. However, there is a new definition, and this is what is more accepted in education today, where it no longer is just about the methodology and the practice. There are now three components, which includes the curriculum, the methodology, and also social education. And that third component is something that's been added on thanks to people like Paulo Freire. And again, we can always go back. I love to bash on John Dewey, so we can always go back to Dewey. And so this is what is kind of the accepted norm of what teaching is that last component. Social education is taking that, basically that front seat, even in front of the curriculum, and it is being integrated into the curriculum and also the methodology. Everything is related. So not only is it going to be embedded in the curriculum, and there's a great example from Florida about what exactly is being taught, where they have this graph and there's this test about, there's this test that you can take. You can go online and you can measure, it's called the implicit association test, and you can measure how racist you are. So they're using data from this test. And just as being a stats nerd as I am, because I love statistics, when you have a self-reported survey, people aren't always truthful. So then there's going to be room for error and all of that. And I don't even know if they go into that, but there's examples drawn from here. One of the charts that was, this is one of the reasons why one of the textbooks was not approved in Florida, is that it's measuring racial prejudice by political identification. So and it shows that people who identified as conservative are more racist, according to this chart. And then they have the students figuring out this polynomial based on this data. And so Florida rejected it, saying, nope, you cannot do that. You're showing political bias. But the idea that not only is the curriculum changing where you're including this, the methodology is changing, because everything has to be about this social justice. That includes replacing individual work and problem sets and rote memorization with what they're calling project-based learning, and replacing it with a lot of group work, with a lot of time spent in the classroom where you're discussing your feelings and emotions, and it's a social emotional learning. And that is taking over not only the content, but the way the teachers are teaching. And it's literally destroying the minds of children.
Deanna, if you were going to take an exam in your doctoral program that asked you to define pedagogy, but you left out that last definition, would you pass the exam?
If that was the only question, no.
It's an important definition, and there's no room for argument.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I had to read books on project-based learning and how wonderful that was, and how to implement it in my own classroom and report back.
So the takeaway here is that the source for this indoctrination is so endemic in the education world that there's really no way to escape it, not even in math, not even in an environment where you would think is untouched by political concerns. It's everywhere.
It's systemic, to use their word.
It's ubiquitous.
Yeah. Well, obviously, our only hope and our only advice that we can give to any parents or even educators that are looking for an out is to truly get out of the system. The system has been poisoned beyond any kind of hope of survival.
And for 100 years now, this has been going back to Deanna's favorite American intellectual, John Dewey and William Hurt Kilpatrick, and those people at Columbia University. But let me make one positive point here, guys, about math, because we did a whole show. I thought it was an excellent show on the hero template in education. And I think that's one good way, that needs to be incorporated into math and science and every field. Teach the heroes of the field along with the principles of the field. So yeah, many of the great mathematicians historically were white Europeans, but that's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what race they were or what gender. Furthermore, the number of great mathematicians in the Arab Islamic world during the great golden age of Islam, both Arabs and Persians. Correct me if I'm wrong, Deanna, but the Mayans and perhaps the Aztecs and Incas, did they make advances? Some of those nations, did they make advances in mathematics? Am I right about that?
Yeah, they absolutely did. And, Pythagoras, we think of with his theorem with the triangle, there's a lot of evidence to show that he borrowed that from Persia, right? But you have Euclid. And the reason why there are so many of these, mathematical principles.
Euclid was Greek in Alexandria, correct?
Right. By these, sort of old dead white guys, which we need to find, according to this one website and curriculum about finding outside of that, is that some of these concepts are literally hundreds, if not thousands of years old. And so, they've been around for a very long time. Now, there is a lot of new math as well, but, some of the stuff has just been around for a very long time. The Greeks were the first to, ask the questions why and just not accept from the gods. And with that came the spirit of wanting to really dive down and understand the universe. And math was a huge part of that.
Right. And so I think, it's really important. Teach the great heroes, along with the facts and principles of each field. Teach the great heroes of each field, regardless of race, regardless of gender. Perhaps Hypatia, for example, would be a great, woman mathematician, and point out to the students that these are the heroes, these are the champions of human life. These are the people who promoted human life, and promoting human life is the good. And it doesn't matter how much pigmentation they have in their skin. It doesn't matter what culture they come out of. It doesn't matter what gender they are. These are the champions who've carried us forward in every field. And I think, in that way, we're doing many things. We're teaching the principles and facts of the field. We're teaching the great heroes of the field and celebrating heroes and showing the kids the human potential, encouraging them to be the best version of themselves. And we're combating racism, ethnicity worship, gender prejudice. We're talking about the great men and women who carried us forward in human life, and gender and race and all that stuff doesn't matter. We're teaching them to be colorblind individualists.
Right.
And so there's so many virtues in a hero approach to math, and every other subject. So many virtues that it's almost inconceivable, like you guys said, that it's not even an education system anymore. The propaganda system, of our schools will not adopt. It's almost inconceivable that they will adopt it. And again, this is the reason why you do this at home, with the kids. Well, find one of the top teachers in the schools. There are many disgruntled teachers. There's so many opting out to start, so-called micro schools or tiny little community schools, that Forbes, a major business magazine, even ran, an article on this a year or so ago. Get one of those good teachers who really wants to teach and is stifled by the bureaucratic system and their irrational ideas and their racist ideas, and start a small school with 2, 3, 4 families. There's many ways to do this, to circumvent the not an education, to circumvent the school system, the monolith of the government schools and the evils that they perpetrate. So that part of it's encouraging.
On that note, we have a couple teachers here that are doing private tutoring on their own. Andy, how can interested parties reach out to you if they want to use you as a private tutor?
Well, they can reach me through my website, which is andrewbernstein.net, or www.andrewbernstein.net. They can find me on Facebook. So it's not hard to find me. if they want to do tutoring in literature or philosophy, which is my specialty. So yeah, andrewbernstein.net is the best way to reach me.
And Deanna, how can interested parents find you?
You can go to rationaleducator.com/tutoring, and you can find out all the information you would need. If you need help with writing or language, English, and history.
And literature.
And literature.
We'll also put a link in the show notes to our previous episode on the hero template that Andy mentioned just now, detailing an interesting new method for how to approach education. But
yeah, and it's so positive, Joel. Yeah, it has so many virtues to do it that way.
Absolutely.
All right, and thanks for your time on this episode, and we'll see you next time. Thanks to Andy and Deanna.
Thanks, Joel.
Thanks, Deanna. Thanks, Joel.